So you might have seen this chart in one form or another, but essentially for us is a three-step process. We start out with a market segmentation that we used to call location analysis. The market segmentation really looks at the key demographics, the ingredients that a project needs to have to meet, to be successful. You then move down the spectrum. Once you filter these locations, you get to what we call the site selection phase, which is really the real estate identification, assessment, and procurement. That's typically when we reach out to communities, we send out an RFP, we get sites back, we analyze that type of data. And then at the end, if you close the deal, usually there are some business incentive negotiations going on between the state and the locals and the company to try to make this a good deal for everybody and close the gap that may exist with some other facilities and sites. Now on the community side, that's the second bar here. How do you fit into this process? Well, the first step we're calling getting on the list. You've got to get on the list somehow. And there's different ways of doing that, either through the data. So if you're fortunate enough that you're in a good location to begin with, that you're in a great MSA, that you're in a good state from the logistics perspective, things like that, that's the data part. The marketing. We often use what we call locations of opportunity. So you might go through your very rational, objective analysis, but you also know of certain places that just have a good business case because projects have been successful there in the past, and they get noticed because of that. And really, if you're at a place where the project makes sense just because it needs to be there, that works as well. So a lot of times, if you happen to be close to a port, project requires a port, well, it's a no-brainer that you're on the list. For a lot of places, in the middle of the country, it's a little bit harder to compete, but logistics is always the part that matters here. So once you get on the list, you need to stay on the list because you always hear about, site selectors. We're really not site selectors, we're site eliminators. So we have tons of choices. Right? Tons of sites, tons of opportunities. We're really looking for reasons to eliminate and weed out the sites that have the longest timeline, the biggest risk, and end up with the ones that will ultimately work best. And if you stay on the list all the way to the end, you need to close the deal. That's typically when you're competing with one or two other locations that are just as good as your location, but now you need to be creative enough to close the deal. And there's a lot of things that flow into that process. It moves a little bit more from the objective side to the subjective side, to the feel of a community and how comfortable a prospect is with having a project located there because they're usually not going to move it. That's when you close the deal. So the key takeaways here really are that technology has enabled the site selection process to move a lot quicker, analyze more data in a shorter period of time. And on the flip side, as a community, you need to be aware of that. And you need to be aware of your strengths and weaknesses to compete in that process. Have you looked at your data lately? Do you know what the clusters of employment is in your community? Site selection consultants have the ability to identify site-level concerns before even stepping foot on the site. So I talked about you can fly the site by drone, you can look at from Google Earth, you can move that little guy, I'm sure you've done it, that's sitting in the corner down on the map, and you get a street-level view of the site before you even go there. So the more advanced your site readiness, the less perceived risk, timeline, and cost become an obstacle. Because, again, our mindset is eliminate, 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 versus just select. So taking those things out of the equation will get you there. And I think then the other piece is we look at a lot of announcements. We look at what's going on in the community as a whole. Who is there? Who are the big players? Who are the companies that are successful? So that's another piece. You need to work with those companies to tell the story. A lot of times we come in the community and we actually want to have interviews with those companies. How successful are you in this market? How do you find the workforce? Any issues? How do people commute? Unionization rates? All those types of things get validated through site visits that validate the desktop analysis. So, again, technology is driving this process, but you can use it to your advantage as well to be a player in this process. And addressing the things for the site specifically help you stay competitive. In other words, make sure you know who owns it, make sure you have an option, make sure you address all these infrastructure issues up front now before the prospect even shows up. That's how you win projects. Time to market is the key for our clients. And, you know, in the end, it may take another 2 years before they even build a plant, right? But the mindset they go in with, the charge they have from their board is, we need to expand quickly, and we need to make a decision. So that's how the project team approaches this, and that's how the consultants try to help in the process, and that's at the other end where the community needs to be competitive to stay on the list.
For more videos, visit Clarksville Now on YouTube.